please, as a reminder, as we're bringing things back in, do not forget to donate today at the donation station, not because we're trying to get rich, but because all of our donations are going to charity. And this month, again, that charity is the Women's Walnut Avenue Shelter. It is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is something that we're doing to participate. So 50% of whatever you give is going to that charity. Please, 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 please do not forget to donate. So we're going to jump right in today because we have a lot of ground to cover. We are continuing our sequential examination of the Gospel of Mark. And today we are in Mark 6, and we are starting in verse 30. So it says this: "The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, 'Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest for a while.' For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, 'This is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat.' But he answered them, 'You give them something to eat.' So the disciples said to him, 'Are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?' And he said to them, 'How many loaves have you? Go and see.' When they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. And so they all sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and gave thanks and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate, and all were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men." That's our verse. I want you to talk amongst yourselves and make some observations, and we're going to come right back so I can give you a little bit of context. So who's feeling brave? Who wants to share what they talked about in their group? Jason, first one up.
The main thing that stuck out at me was the idea of Jesus empowering people to take the initiative to take care of themselves. The Bible calls humanity sheep, and sheep follow the leader. They do what the leader says, etc., etc. Jesus was never about leading. He was about helping people be who they are, to push them to a higher level so they could shine brighter and forge a path for others.
Awesome. We're going to jump right in. Now, a lot of people read this story as a literal miracle. I used to as well. And I get why that's done. First of all, that's what it says happened, right? It says that in English, but the Bible wasn't written in English. But if you read it in itself, it's just an incredibly impressive story. I mean, Jesus takes this bag of food and feeds thousands of people with it. It's amazing. Not even just 5,000. They only counted the men in this story. So it was 5,000 men, which is wrong, by the way. Women still don't count in unjust society after 2,000 years. It's messed up. But this story is likely not literal. It's a symbolic story that is a parable, and the symbolism within the text, in my opinion, is more powerful than if the story was literally true. Now remember, we don't have to read the entire Gospels as if they're literal. Jesus spoke in parables all the time to make points that are true, but not literally true. Now, to understand why it is that this story is so much more powerful if it's symbolic, we need to read ahead a bit to the story of Jesus feeding 4,000 people in Mark chapter 8. There are 2 stories of Jesus feeding multitudes in the Gospel of Mark. There's the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. Now, in Mark chapter 8, Davina's on it, it says this: "During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, 'I have compassion for these people.'" Are you seeing how similar this story is? I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance." His disciple answered, "But where in this remote place can we get anyone to get enough bread to feed them?" "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. 7, they replied. And this is important. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves, not 5, but 7, and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples, and went to the region of Dalmanutha. And I hope I'm saying that right. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. And he sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to it." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. Did you see how incredibly similar these two stories are? Like almost the same stories, just with tiny variations. This is actually a story, both of them together, about Jesus reaching out to Jewish folks and to Gentiles. Now, Gentile was a term for those outside of the Jewish tradition. And in the first story, in the feeding of the 5,000, we see different numbers coming into play. There are 5 fish in the story. The 5 fish, scholars think, represent the first 5 books of the Old Testament. These books are known as the Torah. And then, after the feeding takes place, there are 12 baskets of excess left over. Now, these baskets represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember, the number 12 is very, very important, and this is why it was so significant that Jesus selected 12 disciples. It's a statement. In fact, the word basket here is one of the few times we see a Hebrew word in the New Testament. Most of the New Testament's Koine Greek, but in this passage, in Mark chapter 6, when it talks about the basket, it is the Hebrew word for basket. Now, in the second story, we see a feeding of 4,000 people with 7 baskets. The number in the second story seems less impressive than the first story, right? Like 4,000 versus 5,000. The first story has 12 baskets left over. The second story has like 7. It's not as cool. But in the second story, Jesus has 7 loaves and 7 baskets left over. And this number is significant to Gentiles because it symbolizes the 7 sages that was like their famous ancient philosophers. And they were respected in Roman culture for their wisdom. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The word for basket in the second story is the Greek word for basket. Coincidence? I don't think so. This story is about Jesus bringing communities together that have been divided based on their beliefs, and it's a symbolic call to unify and face that which is oppressing them both in varying degrees, which is something that religion and empire doesn't really want any of us to do. This is also why the Pharisees criticized Jesus in the second story and not in the first. They were challenging Jesus because they didn't want those outside of their faith identity within their communities. So did the miraculous feeding actually happen? Yes and no. Many scholars believe that it happened, but the numbers were not accurate, and the story was mentioned twice to drive home a metaphorical message. However, many myths are often wrapped in truth. Many scholars believe that the events that were described in these passages happened to some degree, and they believe that the Koine Greek manuscript indicates that the disciples brought forth their food to share with the crowd, and that incited others to bring what they had to share forward as well. See, everyone present in the crowd brought their excess together. And when they brought those things together and they distributed what they had, they realized that all their needs were met. They had all that was required to feed each other and more. This is not a story of some magical fish fry. This is a gospel of enough. It's teaching us that we have everything we need right now if we can just share what we have that's in our excess. You with me? All right. So now that we know that, it's time for application. If we make all these observations and we don't talk about how to apply it, it's pointless. So talk about how you're going to apply what we talked about today. Who's going to dive in first? Gotcha.
Okay, well, we were saying how it's really important that people who have more than enough are willing to risk the possibility of scarcity themselves, because there's this fear that if I have more than enough, I don't ever want to experience what it's like to not have enough, and so I'm not going to share what I have. But if we let go of the fear of maybe at some point I will have to experience scarcity, but that's worth it because everyone else is not surviving, even so, yeah.
Good point. And I also want to point out that this verse isn't like encouraging everyone to step into poverty. It is encouraging people to obliterate poverty. See what I'm saying? This is about distributing our excess so that no one has to live in poverty. This is about social and economic justice. What else we got? Yes?
In our group, we were talking about the politics surrounding this and how what we can do is vote people into power who are going to see the value in sharing the wealth and not just giving everything or supporting a system that gives everything to the 1% and leaving a lot of people just scrounging.
What blows my mind is some of the hardest working people I know are dirt poor, and they endorse policies that keep people poor. It just blows my mind. I know people that are physically disabled from literally breaking their backs, and they believe that somehow, like in their minds, corporations have more rights than people do. And it just blows my mind. Like they got to experience the suffering that corporate welfare causes firsthand, and they still defend it. Mind-blowing. So for me, the story encourages us to maintain our interfaith inclusion at Greater Purpose. I mean, I'm a Christian, but if you're not a Christian, that's not what brings us all here together. We talk about values that endorse love and justice and peace and compassion, and no matter what faith you are, you're welcome here, as long as you can agree with those things, despite our differences in beliefs, because I truly believe that Jesus wanted followers and not converts. And this is why I feel that the ethics found in the teachings of Christ are something that the church needs to refocus on, like give all of its attentions to, and stop trying to convert people's belief about who Jesus was. Let's start living like Jesus lived, and we'll worry about the belief part later. My next observation is that, like the tribes and citizens of the story, we are currently under the rule of corrupt government. And I'm not going to mince words about this. And if that offends you, sorry, might not be the best church for you. You're welcome here, but I'm not going to apologize for that, because it's true. People are suffering because of our administration. Sharing our resources to ease those that are suffering as we fight to eliminate poverty and injustice is paramount, just like Cassidy and Eris were talking about. One of the quotes that I love in church history comes from St. Basil the Great, and he said that the coat in your closet belongs to the poor. We all can look at the excess that we have in storage, and we can share it with those in need. Denise, just about to bring her out. Denise is collecting items like coats and especially socks right now for people that are in need. So if you've got socks in your drawer galore and you only really need 7 a week, y'all, please share those with people that don't have access to clean socks. Those things, to put in Denise's words, are gold to people that are struggling. If you have an extra coat hanging up that you think you're going to wear one day, share it. Extra shoes that just sit in your closet, just share it. They belong to people that are suffering under corrupt rule. So please, if you would like to help with that, if you'd like to get Denise some, it doesn't have to be like the nicest thing, but not rags, like something wearable. Talk to Denise about that, because I'm sure she would love it. I'm sure people that are experiencing homelessness here in Santa Cruz would love it even more. Now we're going to move on to communion, though. And this week has been one of the most monstrous weeks in our current administration. It really has. This ceremony that we're about to partake in, and by the way, all faiths are welcome. If you're not any faith, you're welcome to take communion here, as long as we can align on the values and teachings of Jesus as a lifestyle. And this ceremony symbolizes all of our equality. It symbolizes all of us being in this thing that we call life together, and it symbolizes our commitment to make our journey together equitable. Yet, there are those that are using the name and the teachings found in the Gospels. There are those using the name of Jesus, the one whose life, whom the ceremony symbolizes, and they are killing in his name. They are snuffing out the life of those opposed to corrupt leadership, and it's all based in hatred. These horrific events this week, I'm just going to describe all three of them for you so you know what's up, because the media didn't cover all of them equally. We all probably heard that one white supremacist mailed pipe bombs to critics of our current administration. Mailed multiple bombs. Another racist tried to gain access to a black church, and this has happened before in recent history, unfortunately. He tried to gain access to a black church, and he failed to gain access to this church, so he walked to the nearest grocery store and shot 2 innocent black citizens randomly. And when he was approached by officers, he said, "Don't shoot whites, don't kill whites." That's what he said. Yesterday, a white supremacist shot a local synagogue, just shot it to pieces. Killed 11 people. I think he injured 4, and 3 of those 4 were officers. Because he believed that the caravan that is coming our way, seeking asylum, that they're invaders of this country funded by Jewish people. And he believes that the synagogue locally held services that were somehow funding this caravan of invaders. When in reality, the synagogue held services asking for the community to come together and be more compassionate for refugees seeking shelter from a situation that America created. White supremacy is the most dangerous ideology currently in this country, and its origins are in the Christian tradition. These people have missed the message of the gospel. And any white supremacist that claims to be a Christian is full of shit, because they are neither Christian nor are they superior in any way, shape, or form. As we take the bread and cup this week, symbolizing the body and the blood of a Jewish activist killed by white men in power, let us not forget those Jewish people that lost their lives because of the hateful rhetoric spewing forth from a platform that is originating from people in power. Let us not forget the people of color who were going about their day just trying to get food for their homes, that were killed for no reason. Let us not forget leaders that were threatened with death for daring to stand in the face of injustice. Let us not forget all of these people that were killed by white Christian men twisting our faith about Jesus and using the Gospels as a vehicle to spread their intolerance. You are not Christians, and we will not be silent about that any longer. One of the most important things that we can remember after this week is that Jesus was not a white Christian man. Jesus was a Middle Eastern man of color that was a rabbi in the Jewish tradition, and he stood up to corrupt leaders. Let us carry forth that tradition into the world today, because y'all, it is needed now more than ever. You are needed now more than ever. You may partake of the elements. And until next week, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you. May it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Izzy's birthday this week, so we gotta embarrass Daisy.